And now, actually the initiator of this project, NPN, Nordic Photographic Network, Alla Räisänen, from Northern Photographic Center in Oulu, is going to talk. And she's talking on the title, Northern Cities, a cooperation project with Nordic and Russian artists. There you are, Alla.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. Thank you, Gunilla. And nice to see so many of you coming here, but I can't talk about this. This is something happening. So, some words. So, my name is Alla Räisänen, and as Gunilla said, is it okay now? No. Is it okay now? You can hear my voice? Det går runt. Now, so Alla Räisänen is my name, and I'm the director and curator of Northern Photographic Center, which is a regional photographic center. So we have this unique system in Finland that we have 10 regional photographic centers that are located in different parts of the country. And our Northern Photographic Center is the northernmost, so we basically operate in northern Finland and also in the Barents region, because we are the only photographic organization in the high north. That's, I have to say, like Nordic photography, the concept of the north is extremely difficult also. How do you define? So Julia, our producer, sitting there, we were last weekend in Tromsø in Norway, and it was interesting because these Norwegians, they operate in the high north. So are we operating in the low north or the middle north? And you definitely are southern, south, north something. I don't know. But from the Mediterranean perspective, so we are all like northern and northerners. But there is a kind of a status to be the proper northern. So I hope, in a sense, we are kind of like a proper northern, but not in high north. So that's... Is
that where Santa Claus is?
Yeah, that's a little bit further north. But you know, north is very complicated concept. So, and I was a little bit surprised when Gunilla asked me to talk about this really old project, Northern Cities. This is more than 10 years ago when we had this project. And it's kind of challenging to memorize it. It's funny at the same time. A lot of nice memories from that time. The project started 2003 and ended 2005, and then we had an exhibition tour until 2007. And as I already told to some of you, the challenging part of it was that we were 10 people having cameras with us all the time. So I think there's tens of thousands of photographs from this project from 5 years. But do you know what? None is survived. So I was looking for the material for this presentation, and we had a lot of CDs where we had a lot of materials, like thousands of images, and they're all corrupted, and we can't open them. And then, of course, I called to the artists and asked, like, hey, do you have any photographs, like from the workshops or from the project? And they all said that, I don't know which computer. I have changed my computer at least 5 or 6 times, and I don't remember where they are. So nobody's having them. So luckily, we made this catalog. So this printed material, so that there are some images left and a text. I have some copies with me, so if you're interested, you can take. And then that's why my presentation, this PowerPoint presentation, is based on this catalog, and I'm not sure if it's not very good quality, but at least you can see something. So about it's not working. Of course it's not. What did I do? And then it's supposed just to go around that, like my talk is not connected, like to this. Okay, now. So maybe some of you recognize this. This is one of the artists that was the cover of the catalog and also in the invitation cards and posters. And that's the Swedish artist Julia Peirone. But let's go into the beginning. So the idea for this project came from Jussi Vilkuna, who was the chief editor of the cultural magazine Kaltio at that time. By the way, 70 years old cultural magazine in the north. So that some might be a little bit older than your catalog. Kaltio is also 70 years old at that time now. So, as I said in the beginning, the concept of the North is very complicated. So in the beginning of 2000, we often have these discussions at the board of the Northern Photographic Center, like what does it mean, the concept of the North? And we were talking about the images of the North. And at that time, we wondered if there were any photographers who had been shooting urban images and city life in the north, and especially in the Barents region, because there are several cities in the Barents region, and also like Murmansk is really big, like millions of people living in this Murmansk city in Russia, northwest Russia. But of course, we knew that there are like a lot of photographers who had been shooting in the north. And it's always the same, like the beautiful landscape, reindeers, Sami people and their culture. And basically this is the kind of iconic images of the north, which can also be said that, like in Tromsø, somebody said that I'm so totally tired of reindeer art. So you understand what I mean, that like there are so many photographs of reindeers and roundups and all this kind of traditional lifestyle in the north. But quite few have been interested in the city life or the urban life in the north. So in a way, it's a very stereotypical images you can find from the history of northern photography, not Nordic, but northern photography. So after all these discussions, then in 2003, we decided that we have to have a project, that we should have a project that could kind of change these stereotypical images of the north. And then the center, like Photographic Center, we contacted the Regional Art Council of the Oulu province, and we kind of asked them if they would be interested in participating in this kind of project, and they said yes. And that was good, because at that time they were looking for a new regional artist, and then they decided that the new artist would be in the field of photography. And then they promised that the regional artist photographer would be involved with this project from the very beginning, and so they contributed in that way that we had a person from the Art Council for 3 years who was working together with me with this project. And we got so excited about this project that we organized a Nordic call for artists before we had got any funding for that. So that was like interesting. And also that comes to the field of photography in the Nordic countries, that of course we thought that there would be like photographic organizations in northern Sweden and Norway, that we just contact these institutions and they will find an artist for us. But surprise, surprise, there are none. So we contacted Centrum for Photography and asked them to spread the call for artists. The same in Norway with the Förbundet Fria Fotografer, and in Denmark we contacted Beate Czekielska because somebody knew that Beate had been active in the field of photography at that time, and so we asked her to help us to find the artist. And actually we got about like 20 like applications from Nordic countries. And then we selected Julia Peirone from Sweden, Jan Bilgaard from Denmark, Kato Lauritsen from Norway, Atli Marhaf Steinsson from Iceland, Minna Rainio Vesaranta, and Perttu Saksa from Finland. This was really tailor-made project in a way that we really carefully planned how to apply funding for this project. So at that time, Nordic Culture Foundation, they prioritized the projects that the artists were under 36. So that was carefully decided that nobody over 36 will be selected to this project. But they also wanted at that time that this kind of Nordic projects should have some kind of cooperation with Russia. So luckily, there is a system that is like a forum that is developed by the Finnish Ministry of Education and Culture and the Russian Federation Ministry of Culture. And they organize this kind of forum every year where you can look for a partnership for different kind of projects. So what we did, we were looking for photographers. And then we got 2 answers from the officials from the Murmansk Oblast and Komi Republic. And there's a difference in the culture in that sense that from both officials they just proposed us 1 artist, and basically because we had promised to the Cultural Foundation that we have Northwest Russian artists, so we had to accept these 2 Russian artists to be part of the project. So Anna Smirnova was accepted from Murmansk Oblast and Alexander Nashekin from Komi Republic. And as I said, it's kind of fun to memorize this project from so many years ago. And actually, when starting to do this, I realized that the whole project was amazing in very many ways. First, the structure of the project. So what we had was 6 workshops that they were held in different northern cities. The cities were kind of selected randomly. There was kind of no idea behind, just cities that came into our mind. So we started the workshops in Oulu, Finland. Then after 2 months, we traveled to Tromsø, Norway. Then we traveled to Syktyvkar, Komi Republic. Then Tornio-Haaparanta, Finland, Sweden, border cities, or twin cities as they are called nowadays. Then we traveled to Murmansk, and then Reykjavik, Iceland. And all 9 artists, myself and then Hannele Pappila, who had been chosen to this job for the regional artist for photography. So we all participated in these workshops. So you can imagine, so this means that in 2003 we all were traveling every second month, and we spent 7 to 10 days together somewhere in the north in the big city that we never visited before, which was fun, I have to say. Lot of funny memories from these times. But also when we had the call for the artist, so the artist had to have an idea what they would like to do during the project. So they had a basically kind of draft idea, and the selection of the artist was based on these draft ideas, what they had. And then when they came to the first workshop in Oulu, so they all presented their ideas to the other artists and of course to us curators, and then they start their shootings. So basically one day, they told what they wanted to do, and then off they go to the streets and they started to do their shootings. And then when we have the next workshop, then they have to present the images from the previous workshop for the fellow artists and to the curators, and we had a long discussions. Everybody got advice and comments and feedback from not only from the curators but from the other artists as well. And also when we came to the city where we had never ever been before, so we had organized it advance, like there were always lectures of the history of the city or its culture or something. So we always contacted university. That was easy task, to contact the university and ask the students if they wanted to help us. And then we got lectures, and especially in Russia, the students were interpreters and was helping the photographers to do their work, because in Russia nobody could speak Russian except the Russians. So that was very challenging, I have to say, in Murmansk and in Syktyvkar for the artist. And then we spent a lot of nice time, in the beginnings of the workshops. For example, when we were in Tornio, which is the twin city, Haaparanta, Tornio. So we saw traditional fishing in the Kukkulafors, you know, this net fishing. And then we got whitefish, and then we had open fire, and we made our food out of that fish that we were fished by ourselves. And then in Syktuvkar, that was really amazing because the officials of the Komi Republic, they really loved us. We came to the city. There was this kind of letters going on, you know, this advertising that said that Northern Cities project arrives. And then when we have a traditional committee dinner, which was organized with the officials or cultural officials. You know what? They were selling tickets to the dinner. So people came, they bought tickets to see us having dinner with these cultural officials. There were a lot of this kind of really crazy, weird things. But that was an experience I never forget. And then in Murmansk, it was like a lot of like really weird things happened. We probably, you know, in Murmansk there is this kind of huge monument which is called Alyosha, which is the monument for the victims of the Second World War. It was like late evening, it was a snowstorm and really weird atmosphere. And then I met some heavy metal guys who wanted to invite me to the party. And yes, I went there. And what happened? They knew that I was from this project, that I was looking for photographers. So we went to a garage, and there was a lot of people. And then, ping, suddenly 5 to 10 photographers came with their portfolios, and they wanted to show the works for me. So there I was sitting on the floor in the garage, like seeing the portfolios. And they were really good artists. But of course, at that time, 2003, it was the officials who selected the artist who could go abroad, so they didn't even have a chance to apply to this project. But anyway, I met them, I saw their works, it was interesting. And many, many stories more I could tell, but nothing. Some of them are not for public. I have to say. So that's what I mean. It's so fun to remember, because all these wonderful memories came back when I started to think about this project. And yeah, that was the structure of the project. But then I have to say the finances was also like a big surprise. Now afterwards, I think that was the financially one of the most successful projects that we have ever had at Northern Photographic Center. So as I said earlier, the Provincial Art Council, they provided the work of the regional artist for 3 years for this project, and they also covered all her expenses during the travels. So that was kind of really good support. And then my work was covered by Northern Photographic Center, but we got support for the workshops from Nordic Culture Fund and Finnish Cultural Foundation and City of Oulu for 3 years. Can you imagine? For 3 years. At that time, 2003, 2005, that was, I think, amazing. And then the total amount of money what we got was a little bit over 100,000 euros. I would be happy if we could get that money today to do a project. But I don't know, we managed well with that. And then also these 3 Finnish artists, Vesa Ranta, Minna Rainio, Perttu Saksa, they all got grants from Finland to cover their expenses. And because we had that much money, that was also for the first time that we could cover the production of the artworks when we then decided that it's going to be an exhibition, so that we could pay all the production for the exhibition works. This is not very usual in Finland, so that this is really rare occasion. So then we come to the exhibition, so that was the result. As I saw these northern cities, or what was the name, I don't remember anymore, I have to check. Yeah, From the North with Love and Confusion. That was the name of the exhibition. I have to explain to you, like, why with love and confusion. So that was like, the whole exhibition was curated like by Hannele, me and the artist. So basically the artist first proposed the works, what they wanted to be included, And then we had a group discussions, and we together decided which works will be included to the exhibition. So the name was From the North with Love and Confusion. So the name refers to these feelings what we all shared during our travels. So basically, especially for Swedish and Danish artists and one Finnish artist, that was the first time they visited the real North. Like they had never had been there before. They didn't know anything about Lapland. They didn't know anything about Sami people or the surroundings or environment where people lived in the north. So that was a little bit like a shock. And also, we were there so little time, only 7 to 10 days. So that was like a quick project. We arrived, then they had to do their shootings, and then we carry on, and then they should kind of choose the works and continue their projects. For many photographers and many artists, 7 days is a really short time to do their artistic work. And of course, Russia was the biggest kind of experience because it's only the Russians and me who can read the Russian language. So the rest of the group, they didn't know even where, they couldn't find shops. They couldn't find restaurants because they couldn't read the signs. So that was kind of weird feeling, being somewhere where you can't kind of cope with your environment. And also, as I said, Murmansk is so big city. It's weird. You enter to Murmansk, you are traveling in the wilderness, and then suddenly you start to see a lot of lights, and then you there's a hill, and then you go down, and then suddenly this huge city is in front of you. It's spectacular feeling when you arrive to Murmansk by bus for the first time. But because we were really kind of clever people, and also we wanted to be really kind of understanding people, so it was a little bit, we were confused when we realized that we were just like the other tourists. We were just visitors, we were the others, and we couldn't kind of get into the life and lifestyle and the ideas of those people who actually lived in these cities. So that was kind of disturbing and confusing, so that's why confusion. But there was like good results out of this sense of otherness, because some of the artists, they accepted this otherness and they integrated it into their photographic works and artistic expression. For example, Minna Rainio, she named her whole series Postcards from Somewhere Else, which is like very personal project. And some, because they didn't know what to do in such a short time, they decided to use their personal life and personal experiences as a starting point in their shootings. For example, the Icelandic artist Atli Mar Hafsteinsson, he got his idea from his grandfather's photo albums, where his grandfather has photographed always like people standing in front of their homes. So he wanted to do a similar project, and that's what he did. He photographed always people standing in front of their homes in all these cities. No, love. This is kind of the most embarrassing thing, because what happened to us happened to everybody who goes to Lapland, to the high north. So we fell in love with Lapland. It's called, in Finland, we call it like a lapis crazy sickness. You get like totally like fascinated about the landscape and environment. But another thing was that actually people who live in this environment, like this nature and environment, is extremely important for them. So, for example, Vesa Ranta, who was photographing heavy metal guys, and all these portraits, like Vesa asked them, like, where do you want me to take your photo? They didn't want to have photos in a city. They wanted to go to the nature, to the hills, to the places where there were no people. And actually then we made some research, and do you know that there, even in South America, there are heavy metal bands who are like singing about the north. and the northern landscape. It's the very essential part of the heavy metal lyrics, this north. And you know what, this stereotypical image of the north. That's what they kind of, this tribe want to kind of support. So as I said, the exhibition was selected, and then that was also amazing, because then the premiere of the exhibition was 2005 at the Aine Art Museum between the border of Finland and Sweden. And then it went to Oulu Art Museum, then to Kerava Art Museum, and then 2006 it was presented in Tromsø Kunstforening, and then 2006 it was presented at the Felleshuset in Berlin, which is the Nordic embassy in Berlin. And then something happened. There was a guy from Austria who was a very important radio person whose name I have forgotten, and he liked the exhibition and organized an exhibition tour in Austria that lasted 2 years, and then the exhibition was traveling in Austria until 2007. So basically it became like a huge project. But I have to say that for me it was like an intensive course to be a curator, because it was only second year I've started. 99 I started at Northern Photographic Center, and I have no background in photography or in the field of art history. My background is in the history of ideas. So that was kind of a good school for me, because I really worked closely with the artist, and I feel kind of like privileged that I could follow the artist, so that from the very beginning, the whole process, how they worked and how they processed their things. But it was also like a high school or university for the photographers, because many of them, they were quite young, still studying at the university, not graduated. So they got a lot of feedback from the other artists, and also they had like 3 years, 2 curators who were working with them all the time. But I think the Russian artists, that was really good for them, because they didn't have any like education. They were amateur photographers, and they didn't know anything about contemporary photography or photography theory. They knew like every camera club people, they were interested of cameras and techniques and things like that. And they had nice discussions with the other artists who helped them and learned them a lot of things. And also they learned so much from each other. And now, as I said afterwards, over 10 years, I'm like happy to say that I think Julia Peirone is now very well-known Swedish artist. Perttu Saksa won the Photo Finlandia 2014. And Minna Rainio and Mark Roberts are well-known artists. They do video art, but they still live in Rovaniemi, and they artistic work is still dealing with the similar kind of topics about this northern lifestyle, but in a very nice way. Minna just defended her thesis, and like many of them, Russians disappeared. I haven't heard anything from them when the project was over, like they never ever existed. But I managed to sell Anna Smirnova's works, like all the works. The one collector bought all her works, these artist works you saw, this girl on a sofa and so on. But I couldn't find her, so I still have the money on our account, like waiting for her if she kind of pops up somewhere. So this is what I have to say. It was a really fun project. Thank you.
Thank you, Alla. Any questions? Yes. Kristine, Kern.
It seems that you got a lot of learning out of this project, and I would like to ask, how have you been able to use that later on on other projects, or have you kind of, recirculated all the knowledge and all the learning you got out of the project?
Yes, I think so. Like, for example, I've helped other people to run big projects because, this was a big project. There's a lot of different kind of administrative things that you need to know, and that I could kind of spread it and share it with other people. But I think the best thing was that I could follow the artist, how they work. So later, when I'm curating exhibitions or working with the artist, I think I learned kind of to understand these processes, that it's not always so easy, that I can have an idea how I would like it to be done, but it's not my job as a curator, it's the artist who decides how to do. So I think yes.
Okay, Nina Grundemark.
Hi, Alla. Hello. I would like to ask you about the financial part. You said you would be really happy to get 100,000 euros once again, and it's hard to get it. Is it because it's harder to get money, or is it harder to get money for a long-term project?
I think in Finland nowadays it's very difficult to get funding for long-term projects, that everything should be very quickly in 1 year. And also it depends because this structure, because we are a regional photographic center, which is an association. We are not like museums, and we don't have the same resources. Also not because we are only kind of 2 people, me and 2 part-time people working, so that's one of the questions. But also the economical situation in Finland is now really, really bad for cultural organizations, so that they're cutting down all the funding all the time. And also there's a lot of competition, 10 regional photographic centers, for example, applying funding from the same sources for similar kind of projects. So you really need to be kind of unique in order to succeed. So that's why we like to cooperate with different organizations, like the Finnish Museum of Photography, Kiasma, other big museums. So we kind of give them our expertise in the field of photography. And that's the way we can survive.
And have you tried with the European Union?
It's so expensive money for a small organization like us. It's not worth of applying. You know that where to get the money to pay the bills first, and then only afterwards you get the funding. We don't have a system in Finland where we could get kind of somebody would borrow us money so that we can pay the expenses and then afterwards get it back. So I say it's expensive money. So I have some catalogs here so that somebody will share.
Yeah, I have also a question.
You said in the very beginning that the photos were disappeared, but you mean the documentary photos, but not about the series you chose for the exhibition, or it's everything is gone. Yeah.
So everything is gone.
Yeah.
Don't trust computers.
Yeah. But I think this is one more evidence of that. What I was talking about, that the lack of resources when finishing the project, that you are not able to take care of the archiving of the photos in any more once, or it's over. But it's really pity because it would be nice.
But luckily we have this small catalog.
Yeah.
Otherwise we would have nothing.
Yeah.
Just my memories.
Good to you.
Yes, Alla. The point of asking you to talk about this project is since it ended 10 years ago. So this is really a kind of a co-Nordic project that we can look at in retrospect. And also it spanned over 3 years. So because that's also one of the things that we will sort of touch on upon this symposium, the processes that happens and what's happened, what comes out of it. So, I mean, that's one of my questions is what you think, I mean, of course you learned a lot and you got to, as you told us, but also what you saw from the Nordic, this was focused on the north. It's not necessarily the same thing as the northern cities in a way. I mean, so in terms of cultural differences, I mean, you worked with also the Russian artists. How, how do you see this in retrospect? That what did you learn, and how could you bring it further in your work?
That's a tricky question.
Well, I was thinking, let me put it this way. I mean, the part of the network that I guess was involved in this project is also the network that you has involved in this current project, the Northern Photographic Network. It's
basically, it was a different project in that sense because we just kind of asked the Nordic network of photographic organizations to find artists for us. But this is different. This is kind of concrete cooperation between the associations, and we try to establish something concrete that we could do together. And the Northern Cities project was to work with artists.
Yeah.
But I think like what we were talking in the beginning of this Nordic photography concept, so that was like, now when I'm looking back, like really obvious that there were big difference between the Scandinavian and Finnish artist and the Russian artist. And of course we all know why, because like in Scandinavia and in Finland there was an educational system. So the young artists were studying in the university level, but in Russia they don't have. So they didn't have that education. So, and also in the 2003, like Russia, especially Murmansk Oblast was very closed. You probably remember at that time like that there were problems in Russia and they couldn't pay the salaries for people living in the north. So for example, in Norway and in Finland, like the military and the officials were ready because they were waiting for like thousands and maybe millions of Russians to rush into Norway and Finland to get food because there were no money. They didn't get their salaries. And I have to say that they were really poor at that time, and there were nothing in the shops. You couldn't buy anything. But so that's the reason why there were so big differences. But the good thing was that these two artists from Russia, they learned a lot because the other artists like taught them, and they tips with the books that you should read this, and have you seen this, and have you seen that. And if they didn't know the artist, so next time we met in the workshop, so they brought those books with them to show them, or they had their computers and they could kind of share the knowledge what they had. But I don't know what the Russians thought, maybe because they were so kind and welcoming people, so I don't remember anyway, but I could like clearly see how the Russians improved their artistic expressions during the time, and that's what I could say that all the artists did the same, because that was like 3 years that somebody was like all the time there for you. If you had problems, you didn't know what to do, then you could always either call one of the curators or to the artist and ask like, help me, what shall I do with this? I can't get forward with my ideas.
Do you have any idea how the project impacted on the artists? I mean, obviously many of them done very well, but typically, I mean, this Nordic kind of thing. If it's
but I can say like you see Julia Peirone, there are no pastel colors anymore. You remember Julia's first works with this pink, and like I think she really deepened her artistic expression, and she has kind of carried on with that. That's how I want to see it anyway. Okay. And Perttu Saksa also doing a similar kind of projects like nowadays, what he started at that time.
Okay.
Yes.
Any further questions to Alla? No? Okay, Alla, thank you very much. So, it's time for our next speaker, which is Kristine Kern, who is director at Fotografiskt Center in Copenhagen. And she will talk on the title, What is Nordic Photography and Does it Solid Ground for Institutional Cooperations? Okay.
Thank you, Gunilla, for the introduction and for inviting me. And yeah, I'm from a smaller institution in Copenhagen, Denmark, called Photographisk Center, which is like an art center or a kunsthalle. Here's an image. We'll be 20 years next year. And we recently moved, the 1st of January, we moved into an area in Copenhagen close to the central station called Kødbyen. And we moved there, and this is a show we had there last year with the Finnish photographer Heli Rekula. Photographisk Center is, as I said, like a kunsthalle, which means that our prime focus is exhibitions. We don't have a collection. We do not buy or sell art. We work more directly with the artist and often do, for instance, installation in cooperation with the artist. And we also do related things such as we do artist talks, we do guided tours, we do sometimes workshops, and we have a small thing, we have a scanner or a digital room where artists and photographers can come and scan the analog images, and we have a small bookshop. So there's things like around the exhibitions, but the exhibition is still kind of main thing. And I'm just adding this a little bit out of context of the title of this speak, but also in context of what Jens told about the scene in Copenhagen. And if you have any questions for this or the structure, please feel free to ask on that also. I might also add that our moving into this building, Building 55, was due to a cooperation that we made with DGI-byen, who has the building is owned by the city of Copenhagen together with Øksnehallen, and DGI-byen has kind of leased the buildings for a period of 10 years, and their main purpose is to earn money, to rent out this big space. But then they have an obligation to the city to show art, and then they invited us to show our photography shows in their buildings. So we kind of there for free, but at the same time we provide what they need to have in order to be able to have these buildings. So it's a kind of win-win situation as I see it. And this also targets on another thing which might be important for us to address, and I think also Alla in a way touched upon, namely how do we fund ourselves in the near future. But back to kind of the topic. And I'm going to talk about what is Nordic art, and this links, I think, very nicely to the introduction you made, Gunilla. So I also hope that this could open up for further discussion, and then I will end with some remarks and questions on how to cooperate on an institutional level between the Nordic countries. So first I have, questioned this, what is the Nordic? And there's been a lot of talk about it, especially in the recent years. I think also, at least in Denmark, Fotografiskt here in Stockholm has been talked much about. Also, of course, compared to the decline in institutions in Denmark who work solitarily with photography, then it's amazing to see such a big institution as Photographic popping up here in Stockholm. And also there has been, at least in Norway and Sweden, huge books published on the history of their photography, I think it was 2 years ago, there was this PhD here in Stockholm, and there were several shows in Stockholm and Göteborg, and there was this large book surveying the whole history of photography. We haven't had that in Denmark yet, unfortunately, but maybe Jens will do it. And then there's magazines, and I would also like to emphasize the joint magazine that Raw in Finland and Filter in Denmark and Objective in Norway, they published this issue on Nordic photography, in which they also debated the notion of the Nordic, and can a photography be Nordic, and what is the uniqueness of Nordic photography. So I have brought to you some example of contemporary Nordic art and photography. Also, I mean, they're a little bit randomly selected, but to discuss the idea of the Nordic in relation to photography, because it seems to me that this idea is more strongly emphasized within photography than in other media. And also, how does this concept make the ground for us as institution to stand out and to cooperate and do things together? So I have made some topics. What is the Nordic? And I have a historical perspective. This is probably known to you. This is the Danish artist Olof Räisänen, who sometimes also is an Icelandic artist. He is born and raised in Denmark, but his parents originate from Iceland. And he make all these extremely large-scale projects. And this one is the New York City waterfalls. And it's just to show you how he also in his installatoric practice, but of course also in his photography, draws upon this kind of, I don't know if you could say cliche of the Nordic, but landscape, water, all these things. And of course here in Sweden you have Anders Zorn. And he kind of, I don't know, maybe also I could also have chosen Carl Larsson, or who do you recognize the most Nordic artist in Sweden? Is it one of those two, or?
Those two works perfectly.
Okay. And I think the notion of the Nordic that goes back to them still kind of clings to the concept of what is the Nordic. And of course in Norway you have Edvard Munch. And I think, I mean, when people start to talk about what is Nordic and think about it, then some of these artists still, although you can see it's a long time ago, they still pops up in the mind of people, generally speaking. And then, I already said that. And then I'm looking at some stereotypes here in the Nordic countries. And then there's, of course, well, they're kind of romantic stereotypes, but also I think part of the point about the Nordic is also, in a way, maybe we could discuss that later, but a romanticism. But here you have the thinker or the lonely wanderer. And of course, you have the Finnish artist, Elina Poteus, and she, of course, her work is very much into the tradition of painting and also romantic landscape painting and so on, but still it also kind of makes vivid again these traditional figures of the romantic artist and the romantic person. What of course is new about her stuff is the change in media from painting to photography, but also the change in sex from male to female. And here's, of course, this is Caspar David Friedrich paintings that she's kind of commenting on here. And she doesn't, I mean, it's also obvious in the title of the works. Then Tonje, who we have here in the exhibition and who is also present here today. I just take an old photo of hers, but of course it would be more interesting if she afterwards would tell about it, but she also kind of performs some of these cliches, but again, she changes the sex, because the one who drove to the far north was a typically male explorer. So here again, it's a female explorer. Then of course, as already mentioned several times today, there is landscape. And this tradition is very strong also in Danish photography. For instance, with artists such as Kirsten Klein, who also works in what you might say an old-fashioned method, where she uses analog, or I think she also worked actually in digital. Do you know that, Jens? Or no? Well, mainly analog, and then sometimes she also prints her images as gravures, so it's not only, photography. And also when she talks about her work, it also gives the impression that it's a kind of an expressionistic or maybe even romantic approach. When I photograph the tracks of changes in nature, I logically give a thought to eternity, she says. And now I showed earlier, when I showed these Elena Boteus, there was this link to Caspar David Friedrich, and Kirsten Klein. There's also in images like this, very clearly links to the Danish Golden Age in the last part of the 18th century, like Johan Thomas Lundby and P.C. Skovgaard. They were kind of Golden Age painters who painted the same motifs as the one she is showing us. And the same could be said of this one. And again, if you look in other contemporary photographers, you also see it reused here in Nikolaj Hovald and Trine Søndergaard's large series, How to Hunt, where this is also very close to some paintings of Lundby. This, of course, is not analog, or at least part of it is, but it's then digitally composed afterwards. So this image consists of a lot of images, originally analog images, but put together in the computer. So all these men that you see on the beach were not there at the same time, but they kind of merged to one photograph afterwards. And then another Danish photographer who is very occupied with this romantic notion of nature is Per Bak Jensen. And he also, I think you might say he almost sees the nature as vivid in a way, or spiritual. So that is very clear when he talks about his works. And again, Hovald and Søndergaard, there's something wrong with the text here, but just to compare, the similarities between the images, and then again, it's from the same series, so the same goes without saying that this is a composition of different images into one image. And then I have a quote by Per Bak Jensen where he says, "A good thing about being a landscape photographer is that you have to seek out the landscape, you have to meet up, to be present. I think landscape contains an original part of ourselves that they give back to us when we walk in them." And I must, it's my translation, but that is again his approach to the landscape, which, to my point of view, or you could say that it kind of embodies the notion that we have today also on the Nordic landscape. I will not comment. I have brought a lot of images, so I will not comment on all of them. These are interesting to watch in a row because you see nature disappearing more and more, and the images becoming more and more white. And then it leads to another series. Oh, yeah, okay, that's completely gone. So it was supposed to be a book of that called Free Zone. I don't know why it's here on my computer, but well.
It must be far, far, far north.
Yeah, extreme north. And this is Joachim Eskildsen, who has also been mentioned today several times, and he is educated in Finland, which is therefore he has a strong link. But he is mostly, I guess, famous for his Roma journeys, but some of his later series are also concentrated of images from Denmark, as this series Homeworks. And as Jens pointed out, there's a big article on his work in the new number of Catalog, and he has a huge show now at the National Photography Museum, which is actually a library in Copenhagen. And then you have Heli Rekola, also touching upon the romantic notion. And this is a series where she works both in photography and video, in which works have this random number tacked onto the name of the place. Tiranakt, or whatever how you pronounce it, was made during a longer stay on the west coast of Ireland in 2000, and it consists both of photo and video, which calls attention to the temporal aspect of viewing a landscape. It's a simple composition. The image emerges almost devoid of meaning. Yet there is the camera's registration and low resolution video image, which indicates the possibility of reading it as a proof, leaving us waving between depicted and the real. So that is at least what she tries. And here again you can see a little bit the same with the Danish artist Mads Gamdrup, who has photographed the same place but different times of day during between sunrise and sundown. He has now gone onto more conceptual work, or at least work which does not depict nature as such, but is more abstract. For your next issue, maybe his new work is more abstract, but still, I think his kind of love for nature is still in a way present in his work, although you might not see it.
He was in a show recently in your gallery.
Yes, he does a lot of dots these days. Then there's Erik Steffensen, who also has a relation to nature in a lot of his work, but he is also interested in art history and art historical references. And as you can see, he kind of alienates nature in a way, taking away the natural colors and adding non-natural colors, as here purple and a kind of yellow greenish color. So it's a way of referring to nature, but at the same time alienating the nature and making it artificial in a way. And then I also have an example of the Icelandic artist Yuri, who photographed more or less all the waterfalls in Iceland. And as you can see here, there's a lot of waterfalls in Iceland. And then she made this installation or archive where you can kind of drag out an image and watch it. And all the images are labeled with the name of the actual waterfall. So that's more historic or archival approach to nature in a way. And this also a little bit, this more, you might call it phenomenological approach, also is visible here in Olafur Eliassen's small cloud series, where you can see a cloud moving in front of a landscape. And this is very, the way this work is made is very significant for his photographic work, as you can also see in this series, the Volcano series, where he also, he photographed a lot of volcanoes in Iceland. So Iceland is also a very, maybe even obvious motive when you speak of Nordic landscape, because Icelandic nature has a lot of Nordicness to it in a way. But here he also make this almost archival registration of all the different, or maybe not all, but a lot of different volcanoes in Iceland. And you can also see that this work has probably also been expensive to make, since he has to do it by helicopter. And then I also just briefly took the Swedish artist Henrik Håkansson, and I think photography is not his prime media. He uses installation and sound and also film, but he always, or not always, but very often uses phenomena in nature, especially insects. I've seen a lot of works with insects or birds in his work. And he takes this part of nature and he puts it in the museum room, and thereby try to investigate possible models for production of meaning or culture or communication. So in a way, he explores the borders between nature and culture, and instead of seeing them as opposite, he kind of points to the complexity in their relations. So this is, compared to what I have shown until now, this is a very different way of viewing nature and culture as interrelated. Then there's, of course, the whole concept of Nordic identity, which has also been touched upon today. And again, I have some random examples. There was this project where several Danish photographers were invited to photograph places in Denmark where we call it, well, the kind of the outskirts of Denmark, the southern and western part of Denmark, which is kind of very far from city center, and people move away, and you must have the same situation in Finland and Sweden too. I mean, no one wants to live there, and there's no work, and all the young people are moving away and stuff like that. So there was this project to kind of focus on this area, and several Danish photographers were invited to photograph in those places. And this is from Bornholm, an island close to Sweden. And here this is Fanø and Nakskov and Hjørring. So this is in Jutland. So these were kind of way of depicting part of Danish identity or Danish culture, which might be, fading away in a way. And then there's this much more romantic approach again, Astrid Kruse Jensen, who has also been mentioned today, disappearing into the past. But to me, I don't know if that was her intention, but I think also this image is actually a little bit humorous, because there's this ladder and you go down into this nothingness, and of course it's very romantic, but it's also in a way a cliche of the romantic, which makes it, I think, humorous. But she did these images, she did it with old expired film, and that accounts for the random colors she did it with Polaroid film, and so that accounts for these strange but also at the same time very beautiful colors in this series. And then there's this project that we had actually also shown at Fotografiskt Center, which I actually saw at a portfolio review that Jens organized in Odense with the Norwegian photographer Elin Højland and her project Brothers, which also is a culture or part of Norway about to disappear. There was these two brothers who stayed on in their parents' house after their parents died, and they lived kind of from hand to mouth, helping people out, growing their own vegetables and stuff like that. And they had no television, and I think they might have had a telephone, but they have no, what you might say, modern equipment in the house. They lived very primitively, and they all went into town once a week to buy the necessities, and then they kept themselves to themselves and lived this very quiet life. And she visited them several times and documented their lives and their way of living, and which is also, I guess, part of a culture about to disappear. And also here in Trine Søndergaard's Strude, these are, it's also actually from Fanø in Denmark, an island near Jutland and also near Germany. But these are things or hats, or I don't know what you want to call them, that people actually wore. They used it, and for instance, when it was very windy, it was protection against the sand and the weather. So, and of course, when she exhibited those, there was this whole debate about Muslim women covering their faces. So I think she started out depicting these folk costumes, and the models are actually the owners of the costumes, and she asked them to wear their own costumes and to pose for her. But when she then exhibited it in Copenhagen, it was also read in connection with this whole debate on Muslim women and should they be allowed to wear or to cover their heads or not. And this shows that, okay, actually in Denmark, women also, used to cover their faces if we go back in history. So that was kind of, a new dimension to this whole cultural identity thing. And then this is an old work, but in my opinion, very humorous. It's also a Swedish artist, but I think, but it's a Danish postman orchestra. And I think at the show there was this photo, and then there was this sound where you can hear them play. But she have had the whole orchestra sitting for her and documenting them, and then recorded their sound, and then you had sound and photography together at the exhibition, which was kind of funny, I think. I remember seeing it, although it's a long time ago. And then there's this Icelandic Love Corporation, which mimics, some of you might remember this American TV series, Dynasty, and they kind of make a pastiche over that, but it's enrolling in the Icelandic landscape. So it's also a merge between American culture and Nordic or / Icelandic, very beautiful romantic landscape. So that was also kind of a cliche, funny thing. And then I have the Swedish artist Annika Lundgren, who has done a lot of public guided tours, kind of performance work, you might say. So this might not actually be photography, but it's more a comment or a documentation of what she has done. And she has conducted this series of Scandinavian bibliographical public educational tours. And of course, her overall general idea is to question, she has done a lot of tours, and sometimes she has questioned the value of historic monuments or the role of the women, so it's kind of also the things that we connect with, or the things that we say, okay, this is part of our culture, or this is a cultural emblem, or stuff like that. She kind of questions that, or rewriting the history, or writing an alternative history. So she questions also these foundations, you might say, of our identity. Okay, this is some very old works, but just to say that the two Danish artists, these are both video works, Gitte Willesen and Peter Land, and they made some works in the mid-90s questioning their idea or the notion of the Nordic / Danish / Scandinavian man, or the role of the man, because of course there's this idea that Scandinavian men are more soft and blah, blah, blah. And so this is a female artist and a male artist, both doing portraits of average, you might say, Scandinavian men. Gitte Willesen, she plays Ludo with 3 different men. The one you see on the images, one she has met on a market, she does not know him very well. Then she plays with an older man, which is her parents' neighbor in Jutland, and I forgot the last one. And then it's just she recorded their kind of everyday small talk while they were playing Ludo, but in the same way also, of course, portraits the man. And for instance, this young guy, he tries to kind of also make a pass on her, and so it's very funny to watch how he approaches. And the other video is by the Danish artist Peter Land, who unfortunately stopped making video, and he lives in Sweden now, by the way, in Malmö. But he had made a work where he had used some prostitutes, and I think in order to kind of even that balance, he made a work where he drank a lot of alcohol, and he danced, and he stripped off his clothes, and he recorded everything, and it was a very successful work, and it's still showed at important museums today. But this also laid the ground for his whole investigation during the 90s and in the beginning of the series of the role of the Scandinavian man, and how the image of maleness might be different in Scandinavia than in other countries. This one is, I guess most of you know Tivoli in Copenhagen, right? This is Nana de Boisboul, and she had made these postcards from Tivoli, where she questions the idea, okay, Tivoli is an emblem of Danishness, of Copenhagen. Every tourist goes there. But then what isn't surely? Well, there's Chinese lamps, there's an Arabic minaret, and I mean how Tivoli borrows all these signs from other cultures and then merges them into a kind of Disney version of the original culture and has now become an emblem of Danishness. And of course, there's much more to her work than this, but I think in this context, it's an important point to how you can kind of rebrand a Chinese lamp to mean Danishness. And I guess you all know what this is. The Little Mermaid, who has actually been in China a few years ago, but is to many tourists a very emblem of Danishness. And then the two quite famous artists, Per Elmgren and Dragsat, worked with her on several occasions. And this one, he is now a permanent sculpture in Helsingør, the city of Hamlet, and also city where you often go to Sweden, actually in the northernmost part of Zealand. So it has become a permanent sculpture there. And of course, it's a Little Mermaid, but just not a mermaid, but a he. And then there's the Greenlandic artist, Julie Hardenberg, and she made a series of photographs where she merged the Danish flag with the Greenlandic flag to question the notion also of nationality, and also, of course, the fact that Greenland is in a way, or not in a way, that Greenland is part of Denmark, but not all Greenlandic people wishes to be a part of Denmark. Some of them wants to have their liberation or to be by themselves, and there's also this whole question of language, and there's a lot of issues between Denmark and Greenland, as you might imagine, and she questions that in a very, I think, simple and effectful way. And this one, I'll not say anything about it because I think a lot of people here knows a lot more than I do. So I'll just showing it also to say how political issues becomes an important part of our culture, defining ourselves. Yes. Then there's the question of the other, because if there is a us, there must also be an other. And I have a work by Tina, who will talk about her work tomorrow, Tina Inghoff. She made this project called 7 Years. And 7 years was the period that you have to stay married to a man, although he might be beating you. When you lived in Denmark, you could not divorce before 7 years has passed, otherwise you would be shipped out of the country. Correct, Tina? Yeah, so that was kind of what her project was about, to question this stupid rule. And actually, I think she managed to change the rule and make it 5 years, right?
Well, I think a lot of debates around it.
Yeah, but you helped to change it with your work, yeah.
We would like to think that we did it, but I wouldn't say, but it helped.
So, and this is another Danish artist, Jens Honing, who took refugees just coming to Denmark and make them pose like they were models for a magazine, or like they were kind of showing off new smart clothes in a magazine. So they were kind of posing in a different way, and therefore you look at them in a different way. And these are just two examples of a very large series of portraits. Then there's the idea of the Nordic, and I just have one more project by Olafur Eliassen, his weather project. Also this sun he made, I think it was actually 2004 at Tate. And this was, I think, what made him well famous. And again, he kind of draws upon the concept, I think, of the Nordic nature in a project like this. So I'm speaking a little bit fast because I hope we can have some time for discussion. And I have made some questions for you. So, Nordic art photography, do a picture have a nationality? Can you see where it comes from? Does it matter? Do you think it makes sense to talk about Nordic photography? And what is then the specific Nordic? We get back to this. And there's also some questions here. Can this idea of the Nordic provide a ground for institutional cooperations? Or is it rather our special version of Nordic democracy that makes the glue which holds us together and makes cooperations easy? I think this was actually part of Alla's talk, that she says, well, we are very close to each other, we have the same kind of system almost, so at least I heard that it was easier for her to cooperate in the Nordic countries than with Russia, for instance. Or is it our common traditions, our shared history, as Gunilla said in the beginning? Or is it, sorry, the types of organizations we are, our structure and way of organizing things? Or is it simply because we are very close to each other geographically? I remember when Kristine curated this exhibition that we're sitting in, one of the starting point for her project, Nordic Exchange, was why always work with the countries far away? Why not work with our neighbors? And I think that was a very good question. And then, of course, there's the question of how to cooperate. And there are several ways. Touring shows like the one we're sitting in here, it was curated for Fotografiskt Center by Kristine. And then it was in Bergen, and then it was in Oulu, and now it's here, the final destination. You will hear more about it tomorrow, but it's part of a greater project called Nordic Exchange, which is partly linked to this Nordic network that Anna and Gunilla just talked about. And here's our blog that you can visit. So there's the kind of joint project outside Scandinavia that we heard about in the beginning of the day. For instance, this exhibition in New York in the Scandinavian House, where some Nordic countries goes together and make Scandinavia or the North visible outside Scandinavia. And then there's co-produced or co-developed shows, as we are trying to do right now. We are working with what's it called in Oslo, Kunstforeningen in Oslo, on a project on democracy, and I think maybe also your museum is joining in. So, and this is a show investigating what is Nordic democracy and how does it work. So this is something that we don't come with a finished idea or a list of artists. We approach people and say, hey, do you want to develop something together? And then we find out, okay, what could be the theme and which artists. So it's a kind of co-production, slowly developed. And then, of course, there's the things that several people today have pointed to, like exchange of information, network, and then I would like to add, of course, you have with magazines like this one. That's also good ground for cooperation, but also I do not despise the internet. So I think also digital projects could work very good for cooperations, like, for instance, our blog, which has also been edited by Oulu and maybe Kristine, also by Gallery Image in Aarhus. So it's kind of a joint project, although it was started by us. I don't think I will say any more because now I talk for 40 minutes, and I think it would be really nice to have some time for discussion with you all. So thank you for now.
Okay, thank you so much, Kristine. And now we have time for questions
Or comments?
or comments. Ulf?
Is there a risk to try to define what is Nordic? Jens talked before about the Helsinki School, for instance, and I mean, not all the photographers in Helsinki are part of the Helsinki School. By defining something, you also leave something outside that definition. And when the Nordic is changing as the rest of the world, do you think there can be a risk to try to pinpoint what Nordic is?
Well, right now Nordic is kind of hot, and it can be used as a brand, I think, like the Helsinki School, which of course is good in that way. So it's easy for the outside world to kind of comprehend, okay, this is Nordic and this is in fashion. Okay, we take 3 of those and show them in our gallery. But of course there's a risk, as you say, because when you put a frame over something, there will always be something outside this frame. So that's a risk. So it kind of narrows it down, maybe, or limited it.
Tina Enghoff?
Yeah. Well, I think that what you showed, Kristine, is showing very clearly that it's very broad. I mean, I was very surprised that, for example, that Dror Fejler and Gunilla Skjold Fejler is in your presentation, because it's very far from what Nikolaj Hovald and they are doing in their How to Hunt, Trine Søndergaard. So I think what is really interesting in what you presented, and all the way to Peter Land's video, that it is actually extremely broad, and there's no specific, this is Nordic. So in that sense, I think it's wonderful that you made it so open. So thank you for that.
Alla Räisänen?
It's about the concepts, because that's very difficult. Like here we have been talking about Nordic, but we have also been talking about Scandinavia. You know, Finland is not part of Scandinavia. Nordic includes all 5 Nordic countries, you know. And also then in the European perspective, when we are talking about Nordic, Nordic is the same as Northern. As you heard, it's not the same. But basically, I think what we were talking in this network in the beginning when we started to create this Week 37 event was that we didn't want it to have like photographic shows like Finnish photography, Danish photography. We thought that it would be better to have a broader definition, Nordic. So for me, Nordic refers only to these 5 Nordic countries. But then it's a difference if we start to look for something, what is the similarities and differences, then we come into the attributes, the quality, or that's not the same thing.
So for you, it's kind of a geographical framework, which I think actually is very nice, because in that way it does not include people or exclude people. So I think that's a nice way to look at it.
Elina Heka?
Hello. One question, and so back to the landscape once more. And I was just wondering, when listening to you, that okay, that we know landscape from the art history, and that landscape has been like very important in all the Nordic countries when defining Finnishness and Norwegianness and Danishness and etc. And now I just like wonder if there's like a risk that in terms of the contemporary photography, we see landscape like much more easier than any other topic, somehow like a subject which is connecting the Nordic countries. So it's quite easy. It's such like an iconic thing in the Nordic country outside photography, that it's very easily you take up the landscape as one of those determinants of the contemporary photographic art. Because like, for example, if I have like a closer look in Finnish contemporary photography, there are quite few photographers actually who are working with landscape at the moment. It's not like something like hot thing at the moment. It has its like historical value and background, but sometimes if you just like try to forget the history and have like a fresh look, you might see very different things than what you see if you have the burden of the history with you. Just like when we were working for that selection in France and discussing what we actually see among these 700 photographs, it's like there was some landscape, but then on the other hand, you can say that okay, that photographers are interested in objects, and that's why we had the series of that revisiting Naturmort, and there is that fantasy element is very strong in contemporary photography, which can define the Nordic photography as well as landscape nowadays.
I think you're absolutely right, and I also think I don't know that, but if you have a list of all the shows that have been made over the past like 30 or 40 years with Nordic photography, I think landscape would top the list of themes for those shows. So I think you're very right in it can almost work as a cliche of the notion of the Nordic, this landscape. Although, I mean, in Denmark we have obviously some artists working with landscape, but it's not like a main theme in Denmark either.
Tonje?
Hi. I would actually just like to continue that discussion because thank you for a very interesting presentation. And as I was looking at it, I was thinking that a lot of the artists you are showing us are persons that have inspired me in some way. Like whether it's Almgren and Dagset or Heli, Heli Rekula was my tutor when I did my master's degree, but also Annika Eriksson has been tutoring me. And I was thinking, why do I have a relationship in some kind of way, either just through web pages or through actually talking to probably 70% of the persons you were showing me. And for me, it's not that much about the landscape when it comes to that gathering of persons. It's very much about the Nordic, but I think it's also this really ruthless relationship between fiction and reality. Like in Heli's work, there is this mixture of her own experiences, historical things, and pure fiction. And also in Annika Eriksson's works, she sometimes actually gather groups herself, and sometimes it's actually existing troops or orchestras or whatever, so you never really know. And also with Almgren and Dagset, I think it's more about this thing that it's a little mermaid in this play. Okay, it's a man this time, but what about people seeing this that don't know the Little Mermaid? I mean, it depends on which landscape you place it in. I mean, as long as you do it in Scandinavia or in a country where people have been traveling to Scandinavia, it's the reading is pretty obvious. But I think that it's you could kind of also see the narrative within the Nordic scene. Or like the melancholic or the play on the different feelings. Also, Elina Boteru's works are also playing on this notion. So I was thinking if that was something that you thought about when you put it together as well, trying to pull it a bit off from the landscape concept.
Yeah, I mean, at least I was trying to kind of have different, ways into how can the Nordic be conceptualized. So, and I think also, for instance, in the end with this more political work that kind of questions Nordic identity, but in questioning it, it also, in a way, maybe confirms it, and so, yeah.
Because I also think that when I was part of this exhibition and also seminar at Scandinavia House, Darkness and Light, that's a play on photography itself as a medium, like the title. But I think at about 50% of that seminar, we were actually discussing scene, stage, and landscape. and also the melancholy of the North. And that's what the Americans wanted to discuss with us. That's the questions they were asking. So I think if you're not working with topography or terrain, like in general, like a lot of us do, you still have to kind of, in a way, you relate to that tradition quite subconsciously, which is also like a good
it's
thing.
difficult to escape, I guess.
Yeah. But thank you.
Hello. The question I have is, I'm from the United States, and my image of Nordic photography from there prior to coming here actually started when the Frozen Image exhibitions floated around. I saw that. And one of the things I see is that the strongest tradition from Scandinavia has been the tradition of documentary photography, humanistic documentary photography. Yet I hear very few comments about that right now, because that's a very strong thing going on right now in Scandinavia and seen elsewhere. So I'm just sort of curious about, I see the landscape, I see the things you spoke about here, but that's the one thing I find nobody talking about.
And that's true. I mean, I could have included it here, but it's like, I think the work that has been shown here is in the tradition of like fine art photography, and the photography that you are talking about, which is very strong, and in Sweden, I think also very much included in museum exhibitions and stuff like that. And both Brands and we have shown Jakob Ausobol, who is, I guess, one of the most well-known photographers within this field. But he's not like fine art photography. He's more art photography, if you can see that. But
Well,
I could have included it. You're absolutely right.
But I do not see a difference between the documentary and fine art. That is shown in big museums and elsewhere. I think of the work of Anders Petersen recently when they did the Varmland work. And
Yeah, but there's a lot of differences here between Sweden and Denmark, because in Denmark you don't see it as much. In Denmark the borders are, I don't know if Jens would agree with me, but the borders are more strong than in Sweden, because I think in Sweden photography has had a bigger platform and is more recognized compared to Denmark.
I can't pronounce his name or remember right now or off the hand, but your Danish photographer that photographed a girl in Iceland, for example. Yeah, that's a work that's got a lot of spread, and then somebody mentioned him earlier, but there is that. I see that work there, yeah. So I'm just wondering, and this work over here sort of, applies to the whole genre of the language documentary photography coming into the landscape, because there was a great landscape tradition in the 19th century, which is documenting the land. So there is that. So one can't separate just documentary, separating it as if it isn't, art photography. It is one of the genres, one of the classic genres in this. So that's the thing I'm sort of curious. I'm not just saying that you did not mention it, I'm just saying that I didn't heard it as much today. And that's sort of a point,
But
because I think it's if you're trying to arrive at a definition of what is Nordic photography, I think you cannot exclude that as one of the things that is, because it's an incredible strong tradition that's even affecting the landscape photography, some of the work you guys are talking about right now. That's Sweden. What? That's Sweden. You're talking about Yes.
Also Norway, actually.
No, also Norway, and I got news for you. Denmark has a strong tradition outside of here, and that also. I think, but it goes back. It still exists there.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about traditions in each country. It's now, how do you say, how I just came from Finland and spoke to a lot of young Finnish photographers there, and they work a lot in landscape with that team, and they feel that even they have a very strong tradition that goes back in Pentti and Samalahti, and well, there are a few of them like we have had in Sweden. They feel very free to go their own way now if they want to, in more landscape photography or documentary, or every person just choose different ways and find their ways to express themselves. So, but I think it's very different now in our northern countries that depends on the traditions we have. What you talk about. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna.
Yes, of course. We have different traditions in all the Nordic countries, of course. But I think one thing I think is interesting that we again and again try to find similarities. I mean, we really want to see them and to have, and there are similarities and there are differences, so there's something with our neighborhood that we really want to collaborate. We can collaborate, and I think we can use that in the international photography, that we have something that's we have these similarities, but that makes it interesting is that we're also different. I think your selection was really interesting. I mean, I should not have made that selection, so for me it was really refreshing, as Elina said, because for me, for example, Olafur Eliasson, he's fantastic, but he's not, I know he worked with photography, but he's not in the photography scene for me. We will have an exhibition with him soon at Moderna Museet. So this kind of seminars, when we are talking about it and we can meet, and the networking is really, really important for us, I think.
Thank you. Hanna, hade du något?
Thank you. It's really interesting to look at. One thing that I thought about was that it seems like most of the projects or photographs were taken in Scandinavia. Not that there was Scandinavian artists, more that they were photographed here. Is that something you thought about when you made the selection, that they should be the feel of the Scandinavian nature and that you could recognize the... Yeah, there might be in some. And you did the Gobi dessert, but I also thought about that, and then I thought about all the other pictures being in like different parts of Scandinavia.
I didn't think about it, but you're absolutely right. I mean, all the artists, or almost all the artists, are Nordic or from the Nordic countries, and that was kind of the focus, to present artists from the Nordic countries working with Nordicness. So I didn't think about the other stuff, but of course you're right. And it might also be because it is in the northern countries that in the northern landscapes or cities or whatever, that you find this Nordicness that I was kind of trying to portray from different angles or themes.
Paavo?
Hello, everybody. I'm very uninformed about the history of photography and especially art photography within Nordic countries, but I started thinking that now as we've been talking and you brought up the idea of humanism in the photos, and because I've been thinking what connects us as citizens of something that's called the Nordic countries. So there is something, some sort of idea of social equality that we've developed that might be unique somehow to this area in the world, and we've been talking about conceptualization and sort of that idea. And I was thinking about the education, and somehow we got this idea in the 18th, early 19th century that, it would be a great idea if everybody could read. And starting from that, we've actually taught everybody, even the poor kids, to read in school. And with that happening, as at the same time as photography comes into being, I don't know if that somehow feeds into it, and also with the idea of that humanistic, looking at everybody as people and getting into that, illusion of classless society and having a king, but you silly people having kings, but still as sort of somebody who has no power at all, and which is very strange idea. And they're just normal people, and we are that idea of equality. I don't know. So somehow that's there. That might be something that's kind of making us believe that we are similar.
Let me see. Hello. I think it was Jens.
Can you go back to the initial question? Yeah. Thank you for your presentation, and I agree, John. What I hear you saying is that you miss the social issue, which is also a common denominator in the Nordic photography. Yes, Strömholm, Engström, Jakob Sobol, the whole Morten Andersen in Norway, the whole, which is also something that we could have focused on in a presentation, I guess, as a common denominator within the North. So that's just it. It depends on what you look at, and in this presentation you've looked at landscape and nature as a common denominator. Could easily have looked at the social issues of the humanistic photography. But can I just, one of the things that we discovered when we collaborated for the exhibition in New York was that there's such a breadth, there's such a scope in photography in Scandinavia that it's virtually impossible to find a common denominator. And we just, I think also initially we discussed whether it should be female photographers, and it also impossible because we have to exclude some of the very best photographers. So it depends on what you focus on. Thank you.
It's short because
yes, I just want to say this. You mentioned the issue Nordic now by this, and I think that's quite a good presentation of different types of photography that we have with a selection of younger photographers working today. So it's good.
It also has this that you talked about, Jens. This humanistic photography is also in this issue. But I think the reason that I did not include so much of that was also because I wasn't thinking of it as expressing the Nordic, but now I'm thinking more about it. I can see that it also, of course, it's not just, a significant theme or trend or whatever in Nordic photography, but of course it also expressed some democratic values which might in some way be seen or interpreted as Nordic.
Okay, Tina?
I think I just have a comment to the documentary issue here, because I have a leg in Sweden and one in Denmark, and I think actually there's a big difference, because I remember just 10 years ago in Denmark, people never made big documentary projects. It was very short, it was very much aimed towards journalism and quick things, and in Sweden, people worked for years, and nobody in Denmark could understand how could you work for years on a documentary project. My own husband, Ken Klisch, he worked in Mexico 10 years, and people thought he was crazy, And so I think there's a big tradition in Sweden of long-term documentary. In Denmark, suddenly what happened was that the journalistic point of view of photography suddenly came up. They won, a lot of the Danish journalistic photographers won a lot of prizes, and suddenly documentary had like a lot of win in Denmark, and things started to change, but it's not that long time ago. So I still think Sweden has another way of looking upon documentary photography way back in time. So that was just a little
I totally agree, and also I think documentary is more valued in Sweden than in Denmark, in a way.
Yeah, since I started this discussion, I just wanted to say I did like your presentation, and it was not meant as a criticism. It was just something that that I was thinking about. And I just want to say something. I'm a professor of journalistic photojournalism up in Sundsvall, and we have a master's program that we really emphasize in the documentary and pushing the language forward more in this direction. And of course, kind of interesting enough, one of these documentary persons ends up being a young Nordic photographer recently. So there is, I mean, I see that blend. We cannot separate the two, and that's the point I wanted to make. Just like one could say from the documentary tradition, you can't do this. This is not photography. It doesn't have any social value, but at the same time, it's not what I'm saying. It's like, that's one of those mergings to bring them together. It's no matter what's happening, maybe where it should go, can go.
But I totally agree, and it's also interesting because I think also on an institutional level there are very big differences between, say, Denmark and Sweden, because the places that this kind of more documentary photography has been shown has been at Jens's Place, which was a museum for photography, but it was not at, say, Aachen or I think Louisiana showing, for instance, Jakob Holt is one of the few exceptions up till now for like classic art museums showing photography. It might be, I think, changing now, but this is something which is very different in Denmark from Sweden, where documentary has been a part of the art scene on a totally different level for many years, I think. Would you agree on this, Jens? Or?
I don't know about Louisiana. Louisiana has been very much forefront.
Is it okay? Yeah, I mean, I have a list, but
No, I agree. Louisiana was probably on the forefront. They were a forerunner in that respect. They showed Irving Penn and Richard Avedon and Eggleston, what have you, Jeff Wall, and have done so for a very long time and incorporated photography within the institution. And Brandt's is probably the model, taking Louisiana as the model now, that we incorporate photography into our whole programming.
Okay, Morten Andernes.
Thank you. Well, I had a comment to your name. Okay, Pavel. Because I think one of the things that I don't know if this was what you were getting at, but one of the things that strikes me with all of this and with everything that we've seen today is, and I think this is a very typical Scandinavian or Nordic view of ourselves, is this assumed goodness. It's an assumed kind of thing that we are humanist. It's an assumed. It's how the rest of the world looks at us, and I'm wondering what kind of. There are very few, or out of the things that we've seen today, there's nothing that kind of challenges that assumed humanist perspective. Like in Norway, we have Torbjørn Rødland, who I think is one of these artists who's really trying to. I mean, he's really getting in there, trying to figure out, tease apart what's a photograph, how are we to look at photographs, what does it matter, where we come from, what tradition we come from, what kind of perspective do we photograph from. And I feel like there's an assumed sense of like everyone is equal, everyone is, we have this kind of a seminar here and everyone is kind of, we're talking about photography but I kind of lack, and I mean, we're going to talk about this tomorrow, but I lack this sense of urgency in the photographs. I lack this sense of, and it's not just in the selection here. No, but I think Torbjørn Rødland is someone who's still saying that what I see from a lot of the work being shown is that they're photographs and they don't challenge the way that we see. They don't challenge where we're coming from. They don't challenge our own sense of who we are, what we're doing. There's not one, the photographs aren't looking at, I mean, Tina, is that, at least this project she was doing was taking, the welfare,
7 years.
Yeah, 7 years, the welfare model and looking at, okay, what's wrong, what can be done? Yeah, no, absolutely, and I don't mean this as a criticism. I mean this as like everyone. I mean, why we're very comfortable. I'm Norwegian. I'm an artist. I'm a Norwegian artist. I have a government grant. It's one of the things that we have to fight against in Scandinavia is this sense that entitlement. We're allowed to do our art. The government pats us on the back and says, "Okay, do your art," and You know, I mean, obviously there's not enough money probably to go around, but there's a lot of money. And who's challenging the way that we're looking at ourselves? Because there's scary things happening in the Nordic countries, very scary things. And photography should be able to address that. I mean, that should be one of the reasons that we're doing this, you know? And where is it? It's not in, I mean, it could be in the landscapes, it could be in documentary, it could be, you know, in wherever, but I think it really has to do with trying to figure out some ways of how are we to go about getting not just people to open their eyes, but to think differently, to really get in, you know, and I think that photography has to reevaluate itself and has to really look at its own conditions, which is super difficult because everyone knows how to use photographs. Everyone knows how to make a photograph look good. Yeah, exactly, it's a very comfort zone, and it's. I mean, you can see it's very difficult even to find what's the question we're looking for. How are we to formulate the questions?
I must tell you that in Finland there is a group called Monday Collective. Yeah. Can you tell us about them?
Yeah, but we have a list, so can you just hold it?
Can you tell about them?
Oh, okay. Hans Kogne. I think you're touching on a question that I'm thinking about too, and it's. I mean, the discussion is very interesting, but it's also very difficult. And I'm thinking, you know, to whom is the question important? It depends on. Is it important to the photographers to be placed as, you know, Scandinavian or Swedish or whatever? Or is it more of an interest to the curators who, for example, intend to show an exhibition in New York and actually give it a Scandinavian mark or a Nordic mark? And I'm just thinking, you know, if you're looking at, for example, Hanna's photography from the US, would that be used in an exhibition in New York to show Scandinavian photography? I doubt it.
It wasn't that there was a lot of works that were not done in Scandinavia, but had a Scandinavian notion.
Okay, yeah, and because that is, I mean, isn't it? Well, it's a question rather. I mean, is it more of an interest to curators, photo historians, to label the use? Now you present a very broad spectrum, which I also think was interesting. In most cases, I think people don't. Maybe you have a kind of an idea what it should look like.
Okay, thank you. Would you respond or no? Okay, then Ingvar.
Hi. Well, I just wanted to say that I think it's interesting also to take in the documentary part, because you're also talking about two things, like you mentioned before, Jens, today, that photography has been incorporated into the art world, and we're part of this whole bigger spectrum now, but we're always just talking now about photography and what we are doing inside photography, and we can define that into smaller fields. And for me, coming from a fine art educational background, but I choose to use the photograph as my main medium and video, and I work like, let's say my starting point is something, a social issue, and I use maybe a language which relates to documentary, but it also relates to fine art or conceptual art, and something conceptual comes out from the documentary, but I always just focus on the photography. So when someone is talking about me in whatever context, they always refer to me as a photographer, but I always just talk about myself as an artist. And so for me, that it doesn't really matter in all these, you know, categories and these things. And also the other day I was asking myself this question. I got invited to participate in a project in Romania this summer, and they chose they called it the Nordic Eye, to look at Bucharest and chose 5 different artists to do this. One from the Helsinki school, one from reportage background, one from more kind of a conceptual fine art thing, and in the end, when I saw the outcome, it was very, very different, and you could relate to the things where they come from. But I saw, did it really matter? Could you, if you would look at my work as a Nordic artist going there, did it matter? Could have been someone else, or in that way? Yes, for me it could have been a Dutch person or a German person, but maybe a nuance to it. But for me, I found it hard to see, if I brought something Nordic to it or not. I was just there as an artist, and I saw something which I found interesting, and I worked with that. But I saw, like, also, because you said Ólafur Eliasson, Icelandic and Danish, we refer him as an Icelandic, and so everyone tries to grab onto him in some sense. But for me, he is an artist using photography. I would not call him a photographer in that way. He's an artist who uses a lot of these things. But I just wanted to thank you to bring it in, this documentary kind of aspect into it, because for myself, I find, it's an interesting, I think, for me, where it's emerging together a lot of different languages inside photography, and to use just what you find the best way to get your work forward.
Okay, thanks. Elina?
I was very happy that you mentioned that kind of the need of kind of activism in photography. I guess that was your point more or less, because that's something that is like happening in Finland also, that there's especially among the younger photographers, and there is a kind of movement to become like kind of activists, and at our museum we are running we had one exhibition this year, and 2 upcoming years we are going to have exhibitions called the Festival of Political Photography. And for example, now the exhibition which will open next February, the theme is homeland, which is really like a hot topic, and there will be works from the photographers having very different kind of approaches to photography, documentary, but also more those who have more like background in fine art photography. So what you mentioned here, I think that you are not like the only one in the Nordic countries who is looking that kind of topics in photography. But like another way to challenge the photography and this photographic art and photographic market is like what you mentioned, that in Finland we have that it's a collectives. I think that's also something that's happening a little bit here and there, photographers working together. But that collective, Mandi collective, the point is that they are a group of photographers producing works together without signing the works, so that nobody knows that who is exactly the photographer, and there you can see like it's a kind of challenging the authorship, and also giving like a platform for all kind of trials and to do something what maybe you are not able to do alone. So I think that there are many things happening at the moment.
Thank you. Paavo, and then Tina as last comments.
Yeah, of course. In also, like, you go to Lapland and take the Suopanterror group. That's a similar thing going on there. But of course, there's a question about to whom it is important. Of course, it's always the middleman who's concerned about the terms. We need to sell this to somebody. We need to connect the producer with the end user, and so the middleman, maybe it's a curator or art historian or manager or salesman or gallery owner who wants to kind of make it easier for somebody to understand what something is and to use that as a means to sell the thing. And of course, there's two words on these pages. There's institution and organizations. Two words that should be should be cooperation. That's cooperation. That's for some reason. But that should be abomination to every artist. And of course, like any single artist should be fighting against all these curators who are trying to create a coherent, grand story about something, and everybody should be trying to fight, as all art, to break and kind of disturb that image. And then there's the other ones who are trying to kind of take that into the image and make one big coherent whole. And that's it goes on and on, like Nietzsche said.
Okay, thanks. We're running out of time, so 2 short comments, Tina and then Morten, and then we're done.
Well, I didn't want to say anything more, but when you started talking about activism, I think that everybody should know that in Malmö right now there's a fantastic photo biennale with activism and a lot of Swedish photographers, and so it's happening out there right now in Malmö. So.
Last comment.
No, I think what Pavel was saying about this idea of the narrative and the grand narrative that the curator and not to diss the curator, because the curator can be an important part of the work if they can explain it, if they have their own agenda, but I think it's their and your responsibility as well to challenge the narrative of whatever is at hand, be it the Nordic or feminism or activism itself. It's that's it.
That was a really good last comment. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Kristine. And thanks for the discussion. It was really, really good and interesting.